Today on Your Daily Detroit, the opioid crisis, and how the shuttering of auto plants seems to be a catalyst for significantly more deaths in Metro Detroit, in Michigan, and the country. My guest is
Atheendar Venkataramani. I am a physician and health economist and assistant professor at the Perelman School of Medicine, University of Pennsylvania.
and he joins me to talk about the study by him and his colleagues in the Journal of the American Medical Association that found among those of working age, there was a stunning 85% more deaths related to opioids in communities where automotive factories closed. We go in depth about the causes, the sense of hopelessness many feel, and some possible ways to help people impacted. Then, two other stories you should know about. An update on more ooze, this time found in the city of Detroit, and another large project in the area is being scaled back due to skyrocketing construction costs. This is Your Daily Detroit. I'm Jer Stays, and it's Monday, January 13th, 2020. But first, a thank you to our members that make shows like this possible. Advertisers generally don't like hard topics like this. To make sure that they get covered, we depend on listener support. Join us as a member for just a few bucks a month at patreon.com/dailydetroit and help make a better Detroit together. Welcome to Daily Detroit.
Yeah, thank you, and it's great to be here.
First off, what got you interested into this topic?
So I actually started working on this general topic maybe 6 years ago, and what got me interested were my patients. I was practicing in Boston, in a town near Boston, Massachusetts, and it was a working class town, and I had a lot of working class patients who were had befallen hard times with both their economic lives and with their health. And when we talk about things like quitting smoking or exercising more, a refrain that they kept coming back to was that they didn't see the point of doing all that when it didn't appear like there was a real future for them, meaning they didn't think that they could get out of the kind of economic doldrums that they were in at a given time. And this was in an area where there were lots of industries that over the last generation or two kind of shut down slowly. So job opportunities for my patients were thin for the skills that they had, and that showed up in their health.
Wow, to be honest, that sounds really depressing, like people had lost hope.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was depressing, and as a physician, it was tough to hear, and it was tough to treat some of the things that came by my patients. And so we heard those stories and wanted to take it to the data, and the paper that we're talking about today about the auto plants is one of the papers that we worked on that try to get at this broader phenomenon of how fading economic opportunity might be bad for our health. And the auto industry was kind of a case study that we wanted to look at. So that's how we arrived here.
That seems like a good one to look at, not only because, I'm biased as we are from Metro Detroit, but hasn't automotive employment, especially with factories, gone down by half in recent years?
Yeah, that's right. If you look at both employment and wages, those have gone down markedly, presumably due to a number of forces. The automotive industry is one of the most heavily automated industries. It's subject to trade pressures, and the consumer demand for different types of cars changes what automakers may decide to produce in a given year. And so as our cars become more technical and more like computers and more like our iPhones, the type of workforce that's needed to produce those cars changes. So all of these different features have, I think, contributed to the decline of a job that was just a generation or two ago, the pathway to the middle class. And this story is, the automotive industry is, I think, something culturally really significant to us, and one that I think speaks to us as Americans. But I think if you look at other industries as well, you've seen the same kind of trend in manufacturing as a whole.
There's two things that kind of stick out to me for this. One, reading your material, you made it very clear that this does not absolve doctors of overprescribing, basically putting this onto more people than they should have, correct?
That's right. I think the supply of opioids nationally has played a huge role, and maybe it's played the dominant role in driving the opioid crisis that we see now. I think that's kind of an empirical question, as we say. But the broader point is that it's both the supply of the drugs and the types of events that happen in people's lives that might lead them to the drugs. We think really combine to produce what is really an unprecedented epidemic in the United States.
And I think about this as well as my second point is that with the coming of more electric vehicles, which seem to be rising even quicker than autonomous vehicles, our research and when we cover the automotive industry shows that there's just a lot fewer parts that go into those vehicles. And the parts that go in are easier, frankly, to manufacture and easier for robots to handle. I feel like this is something that could continue to have effects. If that's the case, it seems like automotive employment may continue to go down.
You've probably spent a lot more time thinking about this industry than I as a physician have, but from my reading, that sounds correct too. And it might be that over time, as the parts get simpler, what might be getting more complex is the software. Even if it's not an autonomous car, there's still so many things that cars do now. I think I was talking about my smartphone earlier. Like cars are like a lot like smartphones now. In addition to their transportation objectives, there's all this entertainment stuff that's been put into cars and all these analytics and all of these different things. And so the type of worker that might be central to the production of automotive parts, as well as cars, trucks, heavy trucks, whatever it might be, it seems to be changing over time.
In your work in the field, have you thought about or found anything that help people deal with some of these root causes? Because I mean, I don't know, it's my experience that when people lose hope is frankly when a lot of other things start coming off the train.
Yeah, it's never just one thing, right? I think it's a number of things that kind of cascade together that come to produce this. And so our research group right now is working on resilience. So this story that you've lived through, I guess, in Motor City, but also the rest of the country is living through with the decline in manufacturing and other types of jobs. It's playing out everywhere. And we really want to understand, does it always mean that health has to get worse when economic opportunity in certain sectors goes away? And so we're trying to find out what makes communities resilient. I think that's an open question for all of us as researchers and policymakers. As a physician, I think, we just need to be a little bit more directive and we need to intervene faster in communities that face these types of calamities. So, in the setting of the opioid crisis, that would mean making sure that we screen people for substance use disorder, we screen people for depression and suicide, and we try to intervene early as health systems and practitioners and public health agencies as we're trying to figure out how to improve the resilience of communities more generally. So right off the bat, I think there's things that we can do. And I had heard that some automotive companies have been trying to do that. Maybe, among ex-workers or people who are being transferred to other facilities, that they're trying to actually intervene on worker health. And so things like that are good steps to try to stop this tide while we sort out what we can do to make our public health more resilient to these types of economic changes.
Well, one of the things about this is it makes me think is there kind of like a merging of different policy fields kind of up ahead? Because I feel like a lot of things are in silos, especially when I think about how state governments, county governments, city governments, which all are on different levels, all have their own budgets, all approach things in different ways. And then you cross-section it again by saying, well, this is economic policy and this is policy around how we interact with each other. I feel like all of this from this research is kind of pushing towards a conclusion of, are these things kind of merging into, there's a lot more to health outcomes than just being sick?
You're absolutely right. So I'll speak from the health side. We've realized that a lot of what makes our patients sick, or a lot of what helps determine whether they can get healthy or stay healthy, it's not medicines I prescribe or screening tests that I do or anything that our health system does. It's what's happening in their zip code. And with that, you have, our paper is one, but there are many other studies. Like just yesterday or the day before, there was a study showing that higher minimum wage levels that states take on themselves are associated with lower number of deaths from suicide. So we're starting to understand that the social world, the economic world, and as an extension, social and economic policy are actually health policy, and maybe even more powerful health policies than the kinds of things that we're talking about now in the health domain specifically.
Well, one of the things that caught my eye in a previous story that we did on Daily Detroit, and we talked with some other reporters about, is that in the city of Detroit, it turns out that asthma is the number one reason why students aren't coming to school. And that's kind of mind-blowing. And then you've got the state's poorest zip code in Detroit, and what's there? All kinds of air pollution. And it feels like just all these things start to triangulate where if you're not looking at it in like a holistic view or like a whole view or kind of zoomed out, you might miss the plot.
You're absolutely right. I think for a long time we have missed the plot. And, more ominously, since 1980, from the United States, if you look at our life expectancy, we used to be tracking with the other G7 nations for decades. And around the 80s, we fell off of that curve, and we're kind of an outlier in how poorly we're performing in public health relative to our average wealth. And so those types of stylized facts and the kinds of things that you're saying, I think really point towards thinking about the country's health as a much more holistic problem that involves many, many different fields: social policy, economic policy, labor policy, the safety net. I think all of these things feature prominently in what's making Americans healthy and sick.
What is it that people can do to help impact these outcomes and make them better? We've got lots of people listening who hear this, they'll understand what we're saying, but then what could someone do next to help influence greater outcomes around this topic? And obviously there are so many of our listeners, I'm sure, that have been or have family members impacted by the changes in manufacturing.
So for speaking to those folks specifically, I think it's an incredibly difficult experience to go through, not just the loss of a job, but the destruction of a community that might happen when a large employer leaves. And so for people who are worried about their family members or their friends or themselves, I would strongly encourage them to make sure that the proper help is received. So going to your primary care doctor, making sure you're getting the right screening, making sure that if there's depression that you have someone to talk to, reaching out and staying connected, because what we found in other research is that when things like this happen, people get disconnected. So as a first order thing, making sure that you're not alone going through this is incredibly critical. As a second order thing, I think, it's going to be incumbent on all of us to make sure that we're choosing the right types of policymakers who are thinking broadly about public health. And so encouraging your state government official, your local state government official, your local government official, your mayor, your public health department, your congressman, to think broadly and to vote for people who share this idea that our public health is tied with so many other parts of life will be really important. Because in the end, I think the response that we need will involve a lot of investment and a lot of different types of linkages between different organizations. And I think from the ground up, we can really enforce that change. But really, the first most important thing is make sure you're not alone and that you're getting help. Talk to your doctor. It's really important.
Well, doctor, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate all of the work that you've done around this, and it's really helped shine a light on kind of the causes of something that I know so many people are wrestling with and is really something that's important facing our country.
Thank you so much for having me, and I really enjoyed talking to you.
Multiple media reports say that more potentially hazardous green ooze has been found, this time in the city of Detroit. The state has shut down a facility at 5900 Commonwealth Street, just hundreds of feet from residences and a short distance from Henry Ford Hospital. The building was formerly owned by Gary Sayers, the same guy who owned that facility in Madison Heights that leaked all that material onto I-696. Although the Detroit property was previously given the all-clear by government officials, the city's Building and Safety Department is saying that pits containing a material similar to what was found at the I-696 site were discovered. That material, hexavalent chromium, or chromium-6, which is known to cause cancer. Today, local TV station Click on Detroit had video of investigators taking samples out of the facility. Another major project is scaling back in the face of increasing construction costs in Metro Detroit. We have talked about this topic a couple of times, including a significant edit of the signature Hudson's project in downtown Detroit. Now is the news that the Mid in Midtown on Woodward, just north of Mac, is going to get a haircut. Originally planned as a $377 million mixed-use project with $58 million in state incentives, Crane's Detroit business is saying that the project will no longer include luxury condos, as well as have other undisclosed changes. Even with the incentives, there's still a financing gap with this and many other projects. Experts say the city of Detroit's investment market, despite the work of folks like Dan Gilbert, is still fundamentally weak. And that'll do it for your Daily Detroit. If you find what we're doing valuable, entertaining, or informative, consider telling a friend about the show or leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. We have a ton of great shows for you planned, both serious and a bit lighter-hearted, and we can't wait to share them with you. With that, I'm Chair Stays. Until tomorrow, take care of each other, and let's make a better Detroit together.